aided by cable companies. Next, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice calls on Congress to approve the nuclear agreement between the U.S. and India. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice today called on Congress to approve the administration's deal with India to share nuclear technology.
And welcome to today's program. We are going to be ripping, because there's no way to download, an April 5th, 2006, so about almost exactly 20 years ago, hearing. I think this was a Senate hearing. It was titled the United States-India Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. Speaking will be Lamar Alexander, previous United States Senator of, I think it's Tennessee, George Allen, also a former U.S. Senator. United States Senator Joe Biden will be speaking. Barbara Boxer, I think she was California, I could be mistaken. Russ Feingold, former senator. John F. Kerry will be speaking. Richard Lugar, who is one of the two names of the Nunn-Lugar program, which is they're responsible for megatons to megawatts. But Senator Sam Nunn and Richard Lugar formed the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which in many ways was modeled after or inspired by the work of an American named David Hamburg, PhD. David Hamburg, PhD, handled much of the nuclear disarmament negotiations and discussions between the United States and the former Soviet Union. David Hamburg is also the father of a 7-year director of the FDA, Margaret Hamburg. So Margaret Hamburg is that much tied into it. I bring all this up because Sam Nunn and Lugar, again, Lugar speaks here. Lugar is the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program went on to become a permanent sub-agency within the United States military called the DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which I think is where many people, such as Robert Malone, you can see how the pandemic was staged. And oddly enough, has a very strong lean towards favoring, as you'll see here, a pro-India stance. Barack Obama also speaks here, quite odd, because, well, God speaks for itself, right? And now the woman speaking here is Condoleezza Rice. Condoleezza Rice is very silently an understudy and was a student, not formally a student, but for Dr. Joshua Lederberg. She wanted to become the United States Secretary of State. She's a Secretary of State. So while Kissinger and Lederberg had a relationship, and Dr. Joshua Lederberg, of course, requires no introduction, one of the most important Americans in the last 100 years to know about that no one will talk about, because most people that you give your money to, that you think are trying to help you steer your way towards the truth, are actually there to make sure you never hear about certain things, that certain things are omitted from the conversation, and you're misled on an hourly, daily, yearly, continuous basis. Condoleezza Rice is a very important person to understand. She's not just a Secretary of State. She's really the Dr. Joshua Lederberg running the State Department. And I think that sometime starting around the 1980s, 1990s, I don't think Kissinger and Lederberg were necessarily on the same page on all things. They're two very strong people with two very different approaches. I think there's a key difference in their approaches there. For example, this Talk Magazine that I talk about all the time, Talk Magazine involved multiple invites from Henry Kissinger, but Lederberg does not get mentioned. For example, anyways, Condoleezza Rice speaks here. This is a long hearing. Oh, Paul Sarbanes also speaks here. Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Think about that. This is 2 hours and 34 minutes. It's a long recording. I'm just going to click go. And, India is the word of the day. I'm not anti-India. Why would I be? That's a stupid thing. It's ridiculous to just be anti-something. I'm simply pro-America. I want America to be as successful as it can be. And I believe India's benefit but to America's detriment. India's right now influence and control of the United States is out of line. And one of the reasons why I found this video, but also because I think it's really important to study the career of Condoleezza Rice. I'm not saying that anyways. Enough of the introduction. Let's just hit go and absorb it. Have a great day. I'm going to be 20 feet over there doing carpentry.
This meeting of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is called to order. The committee meets today to examine the United States-India civilian nuclear agreement. The Indian nuclear agreement is one of the most ambitious foreign policy initiatives to come before Congress in many years. In view of the importance of the committee's work on this agreement, we're especially pleased to welcome Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. We look forward to this public opportunity to explore in depth the agreement and its implications. Last Wednesday, the committee met in closed session with Undersecretary Nick Burns and Undersecretary Bob Joseph to hear the Bush administration's views with regard to the India nuclear agreement. The briefing was well attended, and members listened carefully to the presentation. The briefing encompassed a broad range of topics, but I believe we have only scratched the surface of this intricate agreement and the national security questions it has raised. Indeed, some months ago, I submitted to the State Department 82 questions related to the agreement as an initial step toward establishing a dialogue that would help Congress make an informed decision. The State Department has provided answers to all 82 of these questions. A copy of this lengthy exchange has been provided to members of the committee, and it can be accessed on my office website by the public. I expect, however, that this hearing will generate many additional questions from members. Given the complexity and importance of the issue, the administration must continue to be responsive to this committee and to the entire Congress. Now, the committee is cognizant of how valuable a closer relationship with India could be for the United States. I believe we will find little argument in Congress with the general premise that the national security and economic future of the United States would be enhanced by a strong and enduring partnership with India. Our nations share common democratic values, and the potential of our economic engagement is limitless. The progress made by India in the last decade is one of the world's major success stories. With a well-educated middle class that is larger than the entire United States population, India can be an anchor of stability in Asia and an engine of global economic growth. Now, despite the success, the Indian government recognizes that much of its growing population still lives in poverty. And to overcome these conditions, it will need more trade, more scientific and technical cooperation, and most of all, more energy. India's energy needs are expected to double by 2025. The United States has an interest in expanding energy cooperation with India to develop new technologies, cushion supply disruptions, cut greenhouse gas emissions, and prepare for declining global fossil fuel reserves. The United States' own energy problems will be exacerbated if we do not forge energy partnerships with India, with China, and other nations experiencing rapid economic growth. And that is why I've introduced Senate Bill 2435, the Energy Diplomacy and Security Act, which would encourage international energy dialogues and advance a broad range of energy diplomacy goals. But in pursuing a nuclear relationship with India, we must deal with some fundamental facts. India has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It has built and tested nuclear weapons, and it has declared its intention to continue its nuclear weapons programs and the production of fissile material. Although the U.S.-India civilian nuclear agreement would move India into a closer relationship with the International Atomic Energy Agency and would put more Indian reactors under safeguards. It would not prevent India from expanding its nuclear arsenal. If Congress approves this agreement, we'll be establishing a new course after decades of declining any cooperation with India's nuclear program. It was apparent from our earlier briefing that the Bush administration considered the implications of this agreement on our international nonproliferation posture. And after weighing many factors, the President and his team came down on the side of concluding the agreement with the Indian government. They judged that the deal could be implemented without undercutting our nonproliferation advocacy, and that its benefits included stronger Indian cooperation with international nonproliferation efforts. Now Congress must undertake its own exhaustive deliberations, and we must reach our own conclusions. No one should suggest that the answers to our questions are either easy or obvious. What is required is a thorough bipartisan review of this agreement in the context of nonproliferation goals, global energy requirements, environmental concerns, and our geostrategic relationship with India. We especially thank Secretary Rice for joining us today after a long and successful trip, and for this opportunity to engage with her on this very important agreement. And indeed, Secretary Rice, we are honored that you are here, and I'll recognize my distinguished colleague, Senator Biden, for his opening statement at the time that he comes to the hearing this morning. But for the moment, we would like to proceed with your testimony, and we ask that it be as comprehensive. And do not worry about time limits. We are here to hear you and then to have an opportunity to raise questions with you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lugar, Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity to come and discuss with you this indeed path-breaking U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, and it obviously deserves the support of the U.S. Senate, but we also understand that it deserves the thorough review of the Senate before giving that support. And so that is why I'm here, and I want to note that we are prepared to continue our discussions and our briefings to the point that you feel that you have the information that you need to make this determination. Let me note that I have longer, a fuller testimony that I would like to have entered into the record.
You made a part of the record in full.
Thank you very much. India's society is open and free. It is transparent and stable. It is multi-ethnic. It is multi-religious democracy that is characterized by individual freedom and the rule of law. It is a country with which we share common values. India will soon be the world's most populous nation, and America's exports to India have doubled in only the past 4 years. And of course, India is a rising global power that we believe can be a pillar of stability in a rapidly changing Asia. In other words, in short, India is a natural partner for the United States. But for too long during the past half-century, during the Cold War in particular, because of both domestic policies and foreign policies, India and the United States were estranged. And one element of this estrangement was India's complete disregard, India's complete isolation from the policies that the United States was concerned about concerning proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Now, as a result of India's decision to have a nuclear program, to test nuclear weapons, to build a nuclear program, as did Pakistan, India's adversary in that region, we adopted non-proliferation policies to try and constrain and change Indian behavior. But I think that it is entirely clear now that those past non-proliferation policies did not achieve their goals. In fact, they had no effect on India's development of nuclear weapons. They didn't prevent India and Pakistan from testing nuclear weapons in 1998. They contributed little to lessening regional tensions, which brought India and Pakistan repeatedly to the brink of war. And all of this simply resulted in a more isolated India especially isolated from the standards and practices of the nuclear nonproliferation establishment that have been developing and maturing over the last decades. Now, let us consider the future that we could have instead. The initiative that we are putting before you and asking for legislation to amend the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 will advance international security, enhance energy security, further environmental protection, and increase business opportunities for both our countries. All of these benefits must be viewed in this larger context, of course, of how the initiative itself elevates the U.S.-India relationship to the new strategic level that we desire. The initiative, first and foremost, will deepen that strategic partnership. The United States and India are laying the foundation for cooperation on major issues in the region and beyond, building on and building up our broader relationship between our peoples and governments. I was just with President Bush in India, and I can tell you that the discussion was broad and multifaceted. It was a discussion not just between governments, but between peoples. Discussions about how to improve agriculture in India, much as we helped to spur the Green Revolution in India of the 60s. We talked about the ability for India to access the new technologies to increase its agricultural production. There were discussions about Indian education and the desire for all of India's people to be able to access the new knowledge-based economy that is growing so rapidly in India. And of course, there were discussions between CEOs of Indian companies and American companies, showing that this is a broad relationship that is not just a government-to-government relationship, but that one that is fundamentally affecting our societies. Now, in order to fully realize the potential of this vision for India, we do have to deal with the long-standing impediments associated with civil nuclear cooperation, and we need to resolve them once and for all. We believe that this initiative will unlock the progress of our expanding relationship in other areas. The initiative will clearly enhance energy security. India is a nation of over 1 billion people, with an economy growing at approximately 8% each year. It has a massive and rapidly growing appetite for energy. It is now the world's 6th largest consumer of energy. Diversifying India's energy sector will help it to meet its ever-increasing needs and, more importantly, ease its reliance on hydrocarbons and unstable sources like Iran. This is good for the United States. Secondly, the initiative will benefit the environment. Nuclear energy is, after all, clean energy, and providing India with an environmentally friendly energy source like nuclear energy is an important goal. India's carbon emissions increased 61% between 1990 and 2001. That number is surpassed only by China. This initiative will create opportunities for American jobs. Nuclear cooperation will provide a new market for American nuclear firms, as well as assist India's economic development. The initiative may add as many as 3,000 to 5,000 new direct jobs in the United States and about 10,000 to 15,000 indirect jobs in the United States, as the United States is able to engage in nuclear commerce and trade with India. By helping India's economy to grow, we would thus be helping our own. Finally, this initiative does strengthen the international nuclear nonproliferation regime. I know that there has been a lot of concern about the Nonproliferation Treaty and India's refusal to join, and indeed the view that India should not join as a nuclear weapon state, a view that we continue to hold. I want to say to the chairman and to the committee that the United States values greatly the Nonproliferation Treaty. It is one of the cornerstones of our nonproliferation policy. But of course, there is a broader nonproliferation regime as well. And we believe that the continued isolation of our strategic partner from that regime is the wrong policy choice. The initiative is thus a strong net gain for nonproliferation in general. I might just note that the custodian of the nonproliferation regime, Mohammed al-Baradei, has been from the very beginning a strong supporter of this initiative, and he remains so. I should note also that Great Britain and France are strong supporters, and Russia supports it as well. Both Prime Minister Blair and President Chirac have issued statements in that regard. Now, I want to take just a moment to take head on, if you will, several criticisms that have been made of the initiative. And let me associate myself with what the chairman said. It is a path-breaking agreement, and of course, one always has to balance the various factors in deciding whether or not it is worth pursuing. We believe that the criticisms can be addressed, and I will address them here. First, India would never accept a unilateral freeze or cap on its nuclear arsenal. We raised this with the Indians, but the Indians said that its plans and policies must take into account regional realities. No one can credibly assert that India would accept what would amount to an arms control agreement that did not include other key countries, like China and Pakistan. Second, the initiative with India does not seek to renegotiate or amend the NPT. India is not and is not going to become a member of the NPT as a nuclear weapon state. We are simply seeking to address an untenable situation. India has never been party to the NPT, and this agreement does bring India into the nonproliferation framework and thus strengthen the regime. Third, civil nuclear cooperation with India will not lead to an arms race in South Asia. Nothing we or any other potential international suppliers provide to India under this initiative will enhance its military capacity or add to its military stockpile. Moreover, the nuclear balance in the region is a function of the political and military situation in the region. We are far more likely to be able to influence those regional dynamics from a position of strong relations with India and indeed with Pakistan. Fourth, this initiative does not complicate our policies toward countries like North Korea or Iran. It is simply not credible to compare India to North Korea or to Iran. While Iran and North Korea are violating their IAEA obligations, India is making new obligations by bringing the IAEA into the Indian program and seeking peaceful international cooperation. Iran, and especially North Korea, are, of course, closed, non-democratic societies. India is a democracy. In fact, India is increasingly doing its part to support the international community's efforts to curb the dangerous nuclear ambitions of Iran. In sum, the U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Cooperation Initiative is a strategic achievement. It's good for America, it's good for India, and it's good for the international community. I know that there is a history that we are trying to overcome, but the time comes when you must deal with the realities and indeed overcome that history. President Bush and I look forward to Congress as a full partner in this initiative. Your support for this legislation is crucial, and we ask you to lend it. Together, we can seize this tremendous opportunity to solidify a key partnership that will advance American interests, the ideals of peace and prosperity and liberty for which we stand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much look forward to answering the questions of the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Rice, for your statement and for your reaching out to meet objections that have been offered publicly and constructively. I want to recognize at this moment the distinguished ranking member of our committee, Senator Biden, for his opening statement.
Madam Secretary, I apologize. As I came down today on the train, unfortunately, someone was struck on the tracks. And so everything, we switched to an automobile and drove, and I apologize for being late for such an important hearing. The President and you have built on, I think, the good work that our former president made in making a major strategic decision to develop a close partnership with India. And I believe most members of the United States Senate embrace that effort. But many of us have questions about the wisdom of creating an India exception to the existing law on nuclear exports. I sympathize with what the president is trying to do. India has maintained its democracy for more than half a century in a land of great religious and political diversity. India has built a dynamic middle class in the last 15 years and embraced a global economy. And India is a dominant regional power that respects and a respected international voice, and it's working to improve relations with China as well as Pakistan. And India soon will become, as you know better than I, the most populous country in the world. I can think of no relationship that's more important to develop than the U.S.-Indian relations. I think it's good for both of us. It's not a zero-sum game. And but India's nuclear weapons raise difficult questions. India refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, built nuclear weapons, and the question we're going to ask you about, to state the obvious, is what impact will India's nuclear deal have on the NPT regime? The plutonium for India's first weapons came from the Canadian reactor using heavy water that India had promised to use only for peaceful purposes. The question is, will the current deal lead to a diversion from civil to military uses? I would hope and expect that may not be the case, but it's war. I think we're obliged to plumb that. There are allegations India has engaged in covert procurement of equipment for its nuclear weapons program, and if so, then is India really prepared to crack down on proliferation? I'd like to talk about those reports. Isolating India's nuclear program for over 30 years failed to make India give up its nuclear weapons, but it succeeded, unlike, I think, at least I take some issue with your comment in your opening statement saying there has been no effect in India's development of nuclear weapons by our non-proliferation policies. I would argue it succeeded in limiting the size and sophistication of India's nuclear weapons program and nuclear power programs. And the question is, what impact will this have on India's nuclear weapons program? I had the opportunity to spend some considerable time with India's foreign minister, and I asked him that question directly. After all these years, it's probably time to admit, in my view, that India will keep its nuclear weapons and to help India find a new relationship in the world in nuclear matters. But there are lines that the Indian nuclear deal made by the administration, acting often in understandable haste. Haste by that I mean, I think, as I understand it, I'm not sure you knew you had a deal when you got to India. But there are certain things, certain lines that can't be crossed. We must not assist India's nuclear weapons program, to state the obvious, not because India is an adversary, which it is not, but because nuclear nonproliferation is a vital U.S. interest, as well as a formal treaty obligation. And we can't undermine the world's support for nuclear proliferation regime by saying that nuclear weapons are fine for our friends. I would point out that Nick Burns came to see us. He made a very compelling case on each of these points, but I think in public we should be talking about them. We must not encourage rogue states, and I know that's not your intention, and I stress that India is not a rogue state, by creating a sense that we only oppose proliferation until it succeeds, and then make our peace with the new nuclear power. Congress should not give up its power under existing law without knowing what the India Peaceful Nuclear Cooperation Agreement and India's Safeguards Agreement with the IAEA will contain, which is something that I do want to talk a little bit about as well. I'd like to be clear. India's nuclear deal, the Indian nuclear deal, could go forward without changing the law. Peaceful Nuclear Cooperation Agreement with India would simply require approval of a joint resolution, majority of each of the houses. But the administration seeks a special exemption from the law to allow the agreement to proceed unless Congress enacts a resolution of disapproval, which will require 2/3 vote in each house to override a presidential veto. I realize this is procedure, and many of the listeners will get lost in this, but the question I'm going to ask you is, why does the president want to change the law? Does he doubt that he could get a majority to approve the agreement, and if so, why? I look forward to having an exchange with you, Madam Secretary, and again apologize to you for being late. I will read your statement as the questions are being asked, but America is going to have to and needs to and should pursue close relations with India. It has been in the offing for decades, and we should build a friendship on firm foundation of mutual interest and trust and international support. But we should do it right. And one of the things I should tell you now in conclusion, Madam Secretary, that I said to the Indian Foreign Minister, although I do not see where this is required in a sequence in the deal that is made, but I made the point to the Indian Foreign Minister that to the degree to which India moves forward on these side agreements that they have, ideally, it's not I'm discussing this with my staff, I'm not suggesting we mandate this, but ideally, if they could work that out before we went to a final vote, it would enhance the sense of confidence, I think, here that, in fact, the deal was as good in the sense that they can be trusted to mean what you imply, what you say they mean. But I will get into that as well. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to, in a sense, go out of order here. And I thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. You've had a long travels. And we ought to see if we can get you 2 cots on that plane so you don't have to be on the floor. But thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Biden. We'll have a round of questioning, and we'll have a 10-minute time for each senator. And I ask each of my colleagues to try to be careful in observing that time, because we might be joined by other senators during the course of this questioning, and we want to make certain that all are heard and their questions are answered. Let me just amplify again our admiration as a committee for your committed diplomacy. I think that the travels you have undertaken, the specific missions, maybe even changes in schedule as you proceeded, were tremendously important. The dialogue, certainly with the Iraqi leadership, was critically important. Likewise, and I don't mean to demean any of the stops, but your own willingness to go with Jack Straw into the hustings of Great Britain. Arduous procedure, one with which many of us as campaigners are acquainted, and you are too, and handled those chores admirably, but it was important.
Mr. Chairman, a lot of people on my side are wondering whether she's getting in practice. I don't know what the
well,
she'd be a formidable presidential candidate.
Let's not go there this morning. We'll continue with India and the relationship we're forging even stronger there. Let me just say at the outset that because we've had a moment of conversation about Senate Bill 1949, the so-called Lugar-Obama arms control bill, and we share, obviously, both in the Senate and the administration, some problems with regard to budget and money. But we're looking really at this point toward the State Department's support for what is essentially an authorization of additional activity. And would you affirm that the Department supports those efforts and will continue to work with us in refining legislation?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. We do support. I
appreciate that. I've mentioned also in my opening statement another piece of legislation, Senate Bill 2545. Now, this originates because of our mutual discussion of the problems of energy in this world, and suggests, among other things, that the State Department, as a major focus, will want to take a look at the diplomatic possibilities in the energy field, dealing with India, with China, with Brazil, with a number of countries. As I mentioned to you in our conversation, Undersecretary Zellick, noting my interest in this and the comments that I'd made, had affirmed that this is an interest of his and of the Department. At the same time, why you have not had a chance during your travels to undertake study of this specific legislation, but I would encourage you and the Undersecretary and those that you might delegate to sort of lift this as you have been doing in reorganizing the Department, maybe to a proper focus as we can.
Thank you very much. We will do that. Yes.
Now, let me just say for the record that I want to put 2 pieces in the record. One, a letter from our former colleague, Senator Bill Cohen of Maine, who has written to me, understanding we were going to have this important hearing today. And essentially, Secretary Cohen mentions that he believes that this particular bill we're discussing today will enhance the non-proliferation regime in a major way. I ask that we'll put that letter into the record because it's an important affirmation. Likewise, not necessarily an affirmation, but I think 7 salient questions have been raised by a memo given to me by the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterey. It's a group with which you're well acquainted, and I am too, as a member of their advisory committee with Dr. Bill Potter and my former colleague Sam Nunn. We've been, and they have raised, it seems to me, not in a benign fashion, but nevertheless in an objective fashion, 7 considerations. I'm going to put those in the record and ask at your disposal to try to respond to those specific questions, which I think are emblematic of the non-proliferation community. For my own part, let me just say that I believe that the undertaking, as I said in the opening statement, of a new relationship with India is a cardinal point. That all by itself has to be considered. It has not been a good relationship on some occasions, or at least only mildly satisfying, for reasons that we all understand. After 9/11 of 2001, when Secretary Powell called some of the members that are here today to S-407 and said, as a point of national policy, you, ladies and gentlemen, must lift all the sanctions that we have imposed, political and economic, with regard to India and Pakistan, both and now. And some members said forever, and he said forever. It is a new world. Now, this was a tall order for many who, watching the Indian nuclear tests, and those followed quickly by Pakistan, and some members around this table will recall meetings around the table, cabinet table with President Clinton, as we all thought together, what can we say to Pakistan that might forestall that? And even as we were talking, word came that it was too late. So that occurred, and it led to a number of sanctions being imposed, which many of us voted for and supported. Now, suddenly, all these were removed because we had, in fact, a new world and a new set of strategic relationships vis-a-vis Afghanistan and our allies that we were working with. Now, from that rather difficult start, much has happened, and I compliment you and the President for your initiatives. I suspect the dilemma for all of us will be to weigh this factor. How important is the relationship with India? How important is India? And therefore, we're all in an educational experience, understanding how big India is, how extraordinary the growth, what the promise may be, what our relationships may be. But this is a big experience for each one of us, trying to discover India and the importance. And I think you understand that, and your advocacy hopefully will continue to help us. Now, one way in which India is very important, leaving aside all of the commercial transactions often mentioned, and they're substantial, is in the field of energy. And I suppose that's the second point that I try to make in my opening statement. I'm not the only person in the Congress who has been involved in non-proliferation work and deeply concerned about this. And with my former colleague, Senator Nunn, we have explored the hinterlands of Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, quite apart from most of the stretches of Russia, even up into the mountains in Albania recently, and so forth. So at least I'm a reasonable competitor for anybody who is interested in non-proliferation, finding it and trying to get rid of it. I think in this case, this is why I have referenced Bill Potter's group, for example, a responsible group trying to think through where are we with the NPT, with India and the assurances that we believe it has given. Now, having said that, I've become equally enthusiastic about what we must be doing in the world with regard to energy resources. I believe this is the source presently of potential conflict as great as the non-proliferation danger. This may not be seen by all, but I've advocated that inadvertently, perhaps, Russia, by shutting off the gas to Ukraine, has indicated to the world that countries can be hobbled by turning off the gas without nuclear weapons, without anybody coming across the lines with tanks or guns or so forth. This is the new security strategic weapon, and it is powerful. Now, suddenly, as I visited in Libya, in Libya this summer, and saw in the Corinthia Hotel, a hotel relatively filled with Chinese and Indians, and they all had one objective: to pin down the last acre in Libya. Now, we may not be that avid, but they are, and throughout Africa I saw this. This is not news to you, but the fact is that the search for a dynamic economy like India for energy, we're talking about doubling for 1 billion people or more in just a very short period of time, less than a generation, and that may understate it, means that there are going to have to be alternative supplies. Now, one may say, well, there's surely easier ways of finding energy for India than getting into nuclear power. But I'm not certain I see them. And it appears to me that leaving aside the strategic problems of proliferation, the problems of energy are extraordinarily important here. And I would comment that just nearby, while we've been discussing this, Russia and China have been talking about oil and gas lines from Russia to China. There has been further talk about lines from Russia to Japan, even Russia to Korea, but all with the same characteristics of Russia to Ukraine, for example, or Russia to Germany. Now, we're going to have to think about these things. And I don't demean for a moment my friends in the non-proliferation community who are busy still working through the fine points of that. But this is a world of a dynamic India and dynamic energy needs for India, for us in the United States, for Russia, for everybody. So those two areas are important as I take a look at it. Now, finally, the problem with, I suppose, India, and you have to judge this, and you have, the President's visited there, but the question is there a sense of mutual trust that we are both on the path of non-proliferation? That we trust, as a matter of fact, that even if India has to have, in their judgment, a nuclear deterrent vis-a-vis Pakistan, China, Russia, whoever else in the world, that we all understand that the course of history is not going to be kind to us if we certainly are involved in an arms race. And that the Indians, in their offering of assurances to us, begin to offer assurances to the rest of the world. So I have ceased fire at that point, having exhausted my 10 minutes. But I just simply wanted to take this opportunity to express what I think are important arguments, or for that matter, affirmations. And I suspect you would agree with most of that. So I will not ask for a simple yes or no, but if you have a short comment, I would like it.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lugar. Let me just underscore a couple of things that you mentioned. First of all, we do have a growing strategic relationship with India, and I think it is one that is increasingly based on trust and mutual interest and common values. It's a trifecta, if you will. And I think that that's an important foundation for the relationship to move forward. We do have to do something about the energy problem. I can tell you that nothing has really taken me aback more as Secretary of State than the way that the politics of energy is, I will use the word warping, diplomacy around the world. It has given extraordinary power to some states that are using that power in not very good ways for the international system, states that would otherwise have very little power. It is sending some states that are growing very rapidly in an all-out search for energy, states like China, states like India. That is really sending them into parts of the world where they've not been seen before, and challenging it, I think, for our diplomacy. It is, of course, an energy supply that is still heavily dependent on hydrocarbons, which makes more difficult our desire to have growth, environmental protection, and reliable energy supply all in a package. We've tried in our diplomacy to be attentive to that. For instance, we have a new Asia-Pacific partnership on energy and climate, of which India is a member. We are looking to technological solutions for the energy appetite of growing countries. And of course, being able to cooperate with India on civil nuclear cooperation would help us to pursue that goal. And finally, I'll just note that we also are looking very hard for good partners in the nonproliferation work. I myself, Senator, come from the arms control community. You know that. I know the people of the nonproliferation community very well. I consider myself part of the nonproliferation concerned community. We have to recognize that the NPT is the cornerstone, but one part of a maturing nonproliferation framework, in which we are also working to have rules of the game that the Nuclear Suppliers Group has on certain standards of behavior. India is agreeing to adhere to those unilaterally. To the missile control technology regime, which India is agreeing to adhere to unilaterally. Efforts to get states to give up enrichment and reprocessing for assured fuel supply, something that we're working with the IAEA on. And I might just note here, making certain that those who signed the NPT and then violate it and disregard it are really the ones who come under punishment from the international system. And there, I have to say, there's a very big difference between the behavior of Iran and North Korea, who callously signed the NPT and then have not been in compliance with it. India never signed the NPT, but we are asking India to adhere to many of the important elements of the guidelines that are making up the nonproliferation regime. And so I think we have to think about the energy and nonproliferation as two halves of this same walnut. But I would be very much in agreement with you that on the energy side, we have simply got to do something about the warping now of diplomatic effort by the all-out rush for energy supply.
Thank you very much. Senator Biden.
Madam Secretary, those of us who spent our careers, as at least the three of us have, we're the old-timers here, not referring to you, on matters relating to nonproliferation and arms control, this is a big deal. No pun intended. This is a big deal. And I think if we cut through it all, it comes down to a simple bet we're making. And it's a bet. It's a bet that India appreciates as much as we do, that the two nations have the potential to be the anchors for stability and security in the world going into the 21st century. Not alone, but two of the anchors. And I tried to communicate to the foreign minister how fundamental an impact India's reaction to this deal, if ratified, how much of it is based upon our trusting them not to be seeking this deal for purpose of advancing their nuclear weapons capability. I'd respectfully suggest if this goes through and we are wrong about their intentions, that they will have mortgaged the 21st century, literally, in a way that few nations will be held accountable for having done. They will have squandered, and I don't anticipate this, but they will have squandered what I think to be is an opportunity to begin to build a new century. I mean, I literally think it's that fundamental. And it relates to trust, as implied or stated by my chairman. And And we are faced with a dilemma all the time here, to state the obvious, but for the record, that sometimes administrations, and I've had the pleasure of serving with 7 presidents, administrations and presidents bring agreements to us that we would have done differently, we think, that we would not have moved forward with in the same way. And we're faced with a dilemma. The dilemma is, although the deal we're presented with and required under the Constitution to ratify or reject may not be one that we like, the downside of failing to ratify it, because of the circumstances created by the negotiation, sometimes are further down than any downside might come from the mistakes that it may embody. And so I just want to state at the outset here that I am probably going to support this. I'm going to ask you some very specific questions in this round and next, mainly for the record. But I want you to know, at least I believe and appreciate, that this is much bigger than the sum of the questions I'm going to ask you. And it really does, and I hope our Indian friends are listening. This is a bit of, not a leap, but a jump of faith here. This is a step of faith, that they, in fact, are going to adhere to many of the things they heretofore have said they would not sign on to, that they're voluntarily going to do it. And the bottom line is, at the end of the day, they are not going to be 5 years or 10 years from now, have increased their nuclear capacity and sophistication and number in a significant way that begins to unravel the prospects of peace and security in the 21st century. So let me ask a couple questions, if I may. I am concerned because members of the nuclear suppliers group have contacted me. I've met with some of them. They're concerned. They are not opposed, but they are very concerned. The NPT states that no treaty it obliges us not in any way to assist, encourage, or include any non-nuclear weapon states to manufacture or otherwise acquire nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. Yet, there is a uranium shortage in India now. This would open up the ability for the first time for uranium to be, the world suppliers of uranium to be available to the nuclear, the civilian nuclear reactors India plans on building. But based on the information I've been given, it will ease India's uranium crunch. They have one now, and thereby enable India to take that uranium, which now the argument goes they'd have to choose between the limited amounts they have, between using it for their civil nuclear reactors and their weapons systems. And so what's your response to the international community in saying that this doesn't, at least indirectly, assist or provide the avenue for India to be able to further enhance its nuclear weapons capability?
Well, thank you very much, Senator Biden, and thank you also for the context in which you put this, because we do believe this is a very big deal. And we have also said to the Indian government that this is more about its relationship not just with us, but with the international system. And that's something to be valued and safeguarded. And in a great democracy like India, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of people watching to see how this is carried out. On the question of the Indian nuclear weapons program, first of all, the Indian program, we believe, just in terms of what India's incentives or disincentives are to grow its nuclear weapons program, its strategic program, are more related to the conditions in the region, the political military conditions in the region, than to any quantity of available nuclear material. And the program for India has been restrained over the number of years. I think most people would argue that it's a relatively restrained kind of minimum deterrent program. Their words, not mine. Secondly, the region is one in which the political situation has improved and we hope is going to continue to improve. There's no doubt that when I'm sure Colin Powell was briefing all of you about the near war experience in 2001 and then later in 2002, none of us would have foreseen where we are now with a comprehensive dialogue between Pakistan and India, talks of a peace treaty, even discussions about the future of Kashmir. And so we believe that by strengthening our relationships with these countries, we can actually contribute to that environment, and that's the real guarantor of trying to stop an arms race. But third, I think it's the assessment that we have that India has some 50,000, give or take, tons of uranium available to it in its reserves, and it would need a very small percentage of that on the military nuclear side. And in fact, we do not believe that the absence of uranium is really the constraint on the nuclear weapons program. On the other hand, on the civil side, the amount of fuel that one would need to run a civil program for years and years and years is far in excess of what India can mine indigenously. So we think the incentives, or the crunch, if you will, is really on the civil side, and it therefore gives India incentives to safeguard future reactors. It gives India incentives to safeguard fuel supply and to get that fuel supply under a international non-proliferation regime.
If I could interrupt you because you've answered the question, I'd like to go to one last question in the 2 minutes or so I have left. Secretary Burns, who I have inordinately high regard for, told the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I quote, that, quote, India has decided to adhere to the Australia Group and the Wassenaar Agreement, and let me make sure I quote this exactly. The Australia Group established joint controls over CW and BW materials, equipment, and technology. The agreement works to limit the sales of advanced conventional weapons. Adhering to these groups would be an important positive step. In the past, India has refused to bar chemical weapons exports unless the terms were listed in the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now, here's my question. The Secretary stated that. Has India officially announced that it will adhere to the Australia Group? Or have you gotten a guarantee?
India has told us that it wishes to adhere to the Wassenaar Group, also to the MTCR guidelines, to the NSG guidelines. We are still discussing with India its potential participation in the Proliferation Security Initiative, so yes, they have told us that they wish to adhere.
Well, my time is up, 35 seconds left. I would send a message if anybody in India is listening, that to the degree to which that can be solidified and made as an assertion in terms of Indian policy, it would enhance the prospects of smoother sailing for this agreement here in this body now. I have other written questions, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be able to submit in writing, but I thank the Secretary for her.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Biden. Senator Chafee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good to join you, Madam Secretary. In your opening statement, you said that, and throughout your comments, you mentioned frequently the reliance on Iranian energy. And you said they effectively force India to rely on oil and gas from Iran. What confidence do we have that if this amendment of the 1954 Atomic Energy Act occurs, that reliance on Iranian energy won't go forward anyway, that a pipeline won't be built anyway?
Thank you, Senator. Well, I can't be assured that it will not, but let me just note that that India is, of course, not the only country with the oil and gas relationship with Iran. Some of our closest allies, Japan, has an oil and gas relationship with Iran. The Europeans, Italy is Iran's largest trading partner, so most countries have a different relationship with Iran than we do. But what we are saying to everyone, and I think it is now gaining resonance, is that Iran is not really a reliable, in the long run, supplier because of the behavior of Iran in concerning the entire international community about what its intentions are toward a nuclear program. The unreliability of that Iranian oil and gas supply has got to be taken into account. The nature of Iranian policies have got to be taken into account. And the one point that I would make is that I think you will see everybody taking a harder and harder look at their relationships and reliances on some of these states that from time to time talk about using oil and gas as a weapon when they are confronted with policies that they do not like. And so while I can't tell you that if India has access to civil nuclear, they are going to forego other relationships, it does give them in many ways a better option for a more reliable energy supply than being dependent on states that from time to time brandish the oil and gas weapon when they don't like the behavior of other states.
Would you, since this, you talked about the lack of reliability of Iranian energy, was this our initiative or an Indian initiative?
I'm sorry,
This proposed amendments to the 1954 Atomic Energy Act. It seems as though it's our initiative. If they're concerned about the reliance and the sustainability of Iranian energy, that would be their initiative, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, the initiative to amend the law is simply because we need to change American law, so it comes from the American administration. But the civil
Who approached who on this?
On civil nuclear cooperation?
Yes.
Oh, well, this goes back to our discussions with India, going almost back to the beginning of the administration, where they began to talk about their energy needs, about their desire to be able to engage in civil nuclear cooperation. At the time, we were not ready to discuss that, and we had next steps in the strategic partnership that allowed us to talk about some other aspects of energy. But the Indians raised some time ago their desire to begin to diversify their energy, because right now they're very heavily dependent either on oil and gas or on coal, which for the environment, of course, is a real problem.
My question has to do with in whose best interest is this? It seems as though we want to break the association between India and Iran and their oil. That's the driving force behind these amendments to the 1954 Atomic Energy Act.
Senator, it's not the driving force. The driving force is the strategic partnership with India and having a full-scale partnership with India that can fully deal with technological cooperation, energy cooperation, economic cooperation, all of which we believe are hindered by the absence of our ability to do civil nuclear cooperation. I only make the Iran point as one among many that reliable energy supply is a problem for countries like India that are growing at 8%, that need energy supply, and they're looking for it anywhere that they can. And from our point of view, for states first to be less reliant on hydrocarbons, including ourselves, is a good thing because of environment and energy supply. But it is also a good thing because many of these hydrocarbon sources, these oil and gas sources, are in states that I think we would consider to have problematic foreign policies.
From us and the Congress, it seems to me we're abdicating a lot of power in these amendments. And if that relationship between India and Iran is going to continue anyway, there's no guarantee the pipeline won't be built. We've abdicated power to what? A gain.
Well, Senator, I don't think you're the.
Most of these amendments give more power to the president and take away congressional oversight.
Well, the amendment to the Atomic Energy Act, we believe is necessary so that we can have a reliable and predictable nuclear commercial trade with India. The Congress, of course, and the Congress has up front, and that's why we're coming to you now, the ability to assess the deal, to look at its upsides and downsides, and then to affirm in a vote, yes or no, to amend the legislation that you wish to do so. We will also submit the bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement that we would make with India in support of this civil nuclear cooperation, so-called 123 agreement, would come to the Congress. Even before the legislation, we have offered to brief the Congress on where we are in the negotiation of this bilateral deal, which is a technical deal to try and implement the civil nuclear cooperation agreement. So we believe that there is a lot of congressional oversight. We've tried to come up and do briefings, but we are making a rather fundamental choice as a country, and that's why we thought that it was important to make the choice up front in terms of amending the legislation.
And you mentioned in your statement that Great Britain, France, and Russia have expressed support for this agreement, and you said there's letters from Tony Blair and Jacques Chirac. How about the Russians? Is there any hard copies of support?
Well, there were actually public statements.
Also, how about China also?
Yes, there were actually
Where are
public
they on this?
statements. Oh, certainly, Senator. There were public statements from President Chirac and Prime Minister Blair. The Russians have told us that they support. The Chinese have said that they have some questions. I would note that, of course, there is a history of Chinese-Indian relations to take into account here, not just China's relationship to the nuclear suppliers group. It is, of course, the case that we engage in civil nuclear cooperation with China, despite our many differences with China, but we are not currently able to engage in civil nuclear cooperation with India, despite our considerable interests in common. And so that is perhaps one of the explanations for China's concerns. They have not said that they will not support it. They have said that they have some concerns. I've also talked, Senator, for instance, with the Australians, who Prime Minister Howard has said that he supports the deal, believes it's, on balance, a good deal. And I would just point again to Mohammed al-Baradei, who is the guardian of the non-proliferation regime and the non-proliferation treaty, who's been a strong supporter of it.
And how hard did you try to negotiate a deal that could possibly keep the 1954 Atomic Energy Act intact? You don't have to amend it. Was there an effort to negotiate some kind of deal to accomplish that?
Well, Senator, the nuclear trade and commerce with India, because India is not a member of the NPT, we would have had to do something with the legislation. Now, it's true, as Senator Biden was saying, we could have relied on a year-to-year licensing, which we think would simply disrupt the predictability that is needed for instance, companies that wish to deal in the nuclear trade with India. But our goal here was to negotiate an agreement that kept us firmly in compliance with our nuclear supplier group obligations, that kept us firmly in compliance with our IAEA obligations, that did not run afoul of our obligations to the as members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we were particularly concerned about the permanence of these safeguards. I can tell you that the Indians wanted to negotiate safeguards, for instance, that were not necessarily permanent. That was a red line for us. So the negotiation of the deal was in regards to being able to firmly be able to say to you, we are maintaining our obligations under all of these very important arrangements that we have and treaties that we have, but there will need to be some change made to existing laws and regulations in order for us to be able to engage in nuclear commerce with India.
Thank you.
Thank
the
you.
buzzer has sounded.
Thank you very much, Senator Chafee. Senator Sarbanes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I join with my colleagues in welcoming you back before the committee. I want to try to understand more clearly some aspects of this understanding you've reached. As I understand it, there will be a safeguards regime arrived at with the IAEA, is that correct, for civilian nuclear facilities?
That's correct, Senator.
Now, that's an important dimension, I take it, of this agreement, is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
Have those, are we in a position to examine those safeguards and see what's been agreed to?
Well, at this
This is
point,
going to be an India-unique set of safeguards, is that correct?
there will be, but it will be India unique in the sense that the Indian case is unique. I might just note that the negotiations we will begin shortly with the IAEA. There are three kinds of safeguards available. There are voluntary safeguards. We've made very clear that we do not, would not favor, in our role in the NSG, voluntary safeguards because we believe they need to be permanent. Secondly, there are safeguards that are full scope safeguards, but because India will maintain a strategic program that is not a civilian program, full scope safeguards would not apply. And then there's this third category, which the Indians and the IAEA will have to negotiate. But I would expect that one of the kind of indicators of what they might look like is there are actually 4 civilian reactors that are currently under IAEA safeguards. We might look to those, but we fully expect these negotiations to take place. And since we are members of the Board of Governors of the IAEA, we would have to approve them in that framework as well.
But you're not in a position today to spell out for us what the safeguard regime will be, is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. We do have to have the safeguards, though. We have to have an agreement on the safeguards. So the Indians and the IAEA have to have an agreement before this legislation would actually go into effect.
What about before it was passed?
We believe that the...
You want us to pass it not knowing what the safeguards are?
Well, Senator, we would like to have the legislation passed. We think that the timing,
Well,
the
I
sequence...
understand that, but we're trying to get a full picture here and do a proper evaluation.
We do think that the safeguards negotiation could take some time. Those safeguards will be clear to everyone at the time that they're undertaken. And again, nothing in this legislation can take effect until the President determines that there is an acceptable agreement with the IAEA.
Well, I understand that, but that's the President's determination, not a congressional determination as to the adequacy of the safeguards. Is that correct?
Well, Senator, it is a presidential determination as to the safeguards, but again, the safeguards will have to pass not just IAEA muster of the technical negotiations, but also the IAEA Board of Governors. We think there are plenty of safeguards on the safeguards.
You're prepared to substitute the IAEA Board of Governors for the Congress, is that correct?
We believe, Senator,
this
you will have we will keep you apprised of the safeguards as they're being negotiated, but we think it could take some time. And we believe that the proper sequence is to go ahead and pass the legislation, to negotiate the bilateral agreement, which will be submitted to the Congress and will then give you a very strong sense of what is being done in terms of the nuclear cooperation, and then to have the IAEA safeguards fully negotiated before this could go into effect.
I'm interested to try to understand why you didn't proceed down the path of using the waiver authority which the President has under the existing Atomic Energy Act, and why you're seeking a legislation. As I understand the Atomic Energy Act, there are authorities the President has with respect to waiver which would enable the President to move ahead on this proposal.
Well, our understanding, Senator, is that in order to engage in the nuclear commerce, that is the trade and the transactions, there would have to be congressional action. If we didn't amend the law, there would actually have to be congressional action each time a transaction was going to occur. And we think that would actually undermine the stability or the regularity that is needed in developing trade, nuclear trade.
You mean congressional action to approve the waiver?
To approve each transaction.
The waiver that would go with each transaction. Is that right? Now, under your proposed legislation, is congressional action part of the arrangement?
It is, Senator, because we have to submit to the Congress after it is negotiated a so-called 123 agreement, which is an agreement that is a bilateral agreement between the United States and India on civil nuclear cooperation that comes to the Congress for assent. As I understand it, it's 90 continuous days that the Congress can object in joint session, but it is, there will be a submission of that document to the Congress. In addition, we want to continue to brief the Congress as this goes forward, so that you're fully apprised of what we're doing in the bilateral agreement. But the bilateral agreement does have to come to Congress, and it would have come in conformance with the way that this has been done with others because of the amendment to the law.
Well, I want to pursue that for a moment. The congressional power then would be to disapprove the bilateral agreement?
The congressional power would be to either assent or by two-thirds, is that correct? Or by two-thirds to disapprove. Within the 90 days, although the 90 days has to be in continuous session, so that's probably not 90 days,
I don't
but much
understand
longer.
this two-thirds disapproval requirement.
Senator,
I think you're going to get
yeah,
some help
let me
on
just,
this
here, let me
issue.
just read it here. Yeah. Right. So effectively, it's a two-thirds. Yes, they're just going to refine it for me. There'd have to be a disapproval, and then, of course, the president could override. So that's
what
the two-thirds.
you've done, or what you're proposing to do, is to shift from the Atomic Energy Act, in which the president could give a waiver to move ahead, but that would require approval by the Congress, to a situation in which the Congress would have to disapprove, in which case the president could veto the disapproval, thereby requiring, excuse me, a two-thirds vote in both houses of the Congress. Is that correct?
Well, Senator, the first approval, of course, has to be to amend the act. And
Well, I
so,
understand that, but I'm looking at the consequences of amending the act.
well, we thought that, we think that the proper sequence is that, first of all, up front, Congress has the decision before it to approve the amendment to the act or not. At that point, once the act is either amended or not, we would submit the 123 agreement to Congress. If we do not amend the act, then every transaction has to come for congressional approval, and we think that that will disrupt the very basis and the very need here on an annual basis of the trade that is actually
I
needed.
thought the waiver and its approval was on
An annual
an
basis.
annual basis, not
Right.
every transaction.
No, an annual basis. The list of
You
transactions
just
on
said
an
every
annual.
transaction.
Well, let me rephrase. On an annual basis, the list of transactions. Now, the problem with that, Senator, is that what we're trying to do is to free up the capacity of India and the United States to cooperate in civil nuclear cooperation. Almost all of that is in the private sector, not in the government sector. And the very unreliability and unpredictability of an annual process of the approval of all transactions, we think, would be a pall over the ability of commercial entities to actually engage. That's not how commercial entities plan. It's not how commercial entities
So
work.
your solution to that problem is to move Congress out of the decision-making process.
No, Senator.
I mean, except for the one decision right at the outset.
Well, the decision at the outset really is the critical decision, because at the outset, I think what we're deciding as a country is, do we believe that the benefits of having civil nuclear cooperation and civil nuclear
Well,
trade
I'm
with
sympathetic.
India
I'm
outweigh the downsides?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that point of view, and it's one of the things I'm trying to wrestle with here. But you just told me a moment ago that you're backing the Congress out of this process. As I understand it, for example, you want the agreement approved before we know what the safeguard arrangements are.
Senator,
And the answer to that is, well, the president will know what the safeguards arrangements are, because it can't go into place until he makes the determination that the safeguard regime is adequate. But shouldn't there be a congressional determination that the safeguard regime is adequate?
Senator, the IAEA safeguards that are negotiated with the between India and the IAEA
Has to be approved by the board of directors of the IAEA, correct?
That's right. But of
Yeah,
course,
but
that is
I don't know that they should be substituted for the Congress.
But of course, Senator, in any agreement that we engage in civil nuclear cooperation or bilateral cooperation, the process is the same. The safeguards are IAEA safeguards. The 123 agreement is by assent, not by a vote. And so the difference here is that we are asking Congress up front to treat India as we treat other partners in civil nuclear cooperation. So the decision is, are we going to treat India as we treat other partners in civil nuclear cooperation? At the point that that determination is made, we would treat India.
This is further complicated because other partners, as I understand it now, have undertaken not to produce fissile materials. Is that correct?
Other partners are, of course, non-nuclear weapon states at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But, Senator,
And the nuclear weapon states have undertaken not to produce additional fissile material?
no, Senator. As a matter of fact, there is an international effort underway for a fissile material cutoff treaty, which the United States supports. But we have a moratorium, that's right, on fissile material production, and we've encouraged others to do that. But the fact is that we are not asking, once the law is amended, we're not asking for special treatment or for a different role for Congress once the change in the law is taking place. Once you change the law, then we're asking for the same process that we would use with any bilateral agreement to do civil nuclear cooperation. The decision up front is whether or not to treat India as a so-called conforming state. In other words, whether to treat India as we treat others in civil nuclear cooperation. And we thought that this was the right discussion to have as a country up front, whether or not we wish to pursue this arrangement.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Senator Sarbanes. Senator Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will eventually get on. There we go. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being with us. The ranking member earlier on mentioned and characterized this as whether or not this would be a good bet for us to secure this agreement or come up with this agreement, this protocol with India. And when one is thinking of betting, I look at this as a good bet. Two things you look at when you're betting. Number one is past performance. You always like to look at the track record. If it's a horse, obviously it starts and finishes, times, track conditions, and so forth. And then you also want to look at what's the benefit, what's the payoff in it. And I think when you look at India's past performance and you look at the benefits to India and to the United States and indeed Asia and the world, I think this is a very good bet for our country. One is a partnership with a country that is the world's largest representative democracy with us, who is the oldest representative democracy. It has, there's a shared desire for peace in Asia. There's a shared sense of the importance of religious tolerance, individual rights. I think it makes sense for our security as well. The energy demand, which has been brought up back and forth here, I think it's very important. I was in India last November. The air quality there is just awful. It's just, it made me appreciate our clean air here in
Come to
this
Los
country.
Angeles.
Fine. I've been there. My mother lives there. India is worse than Los Angeles.
I would hope so.
Well, the people in India, and I think the people in other parts of the United States and the world, and the air's awful in China as well. The point of the matter is they have dirty coal, high sulfur coal. They import a lot of coal, and I think clean coal technology needs to be part of the solution here in the United States, as we're the Saudi Arabia of the world in coal. In India, though, their coal is a very dirty coal. It's a high sulfur coal. Nuclear power is part of a way for them to clean up their environment. There also is the realization that our energy, particularly oil, which doesn't necessarily come that much from this country, but from hostile areas in the Middle East and elsewhere, that the demand for oil, and whether it's in Central Europe's strengthening the economy, India's growing economy, China's growing economy, all that increases the price of oil. And to the extent that oil or clean burning natural gas is being used for electricity generation as opposed to transportation or for manufacturing, that affects the United States as well. Obviously, the air pollution in India primarily affects those in India and neighboring countries. And then the other aspect, it's tertiary in my view, but it is important, and that's the economic benefits to U.S. companies, U.S. jobs, and others. And the question comes up, is this going to undermine somehow the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and why is India being treated differently? Well, India has an exemplary record of non-proliferating materials. Other countries, North Korea, Iran, certainly do not have that record. I think this is actually bringing them into the regime. There's going to be greater scrutiny, greater transparency, as most of their nuclear power plants will be under that regime. So I look at the energy and the economic benefits of this as being very, very important, and most importantly, as having India as a partner. We are not going to win the war on terror. We are not going to be able to advance freedom just on our own. We have throughout our history, whether it's from the secession from Britain to World War I, World War II, the Cold War, it could not be the U.S. alone. And India, I think, is a country that can positively impact these goals for our country and our values. And it's not just going to be a short-term matter. I think this is going to be beneficial for generations to come. Now, let me ask you, Madam Secretary, as you know, I've sponsored this, so I'm obviously in favor of it, thinking it's a good bet. I think it's an ideal bet, and I'm glad we have the chance to get this done, and I congratulate you and the administration on this, I think, historic breakthrough agreement. One thing that I've asked in the past, though, is India, while they're non-conforming in many respects, I think it would be desirable for India and their government to join the Proliferation Security Initiative. I'd like to pose this question to you. Are you, or is our administration, encouraging, prodding, cajoling, respectfully of course, India to join the Proliferation Security Initiative? And do you believe it would be helpful for India to join?
We are, in fact, prodding the Indians to do so, and they've shown great interest in the Proliferation Security Initiative. They've had some questions concerning how it might affect certain interpretations that they have about the law of the sea, but we have, I think, been answering those for them. And we think they could be a tremendous asset in the Proliferation Security Initiative, given their naval assets and given the geographic location of India. And so, yes, we are very much prodding them, and I hope they're going to participate.
Do you know if that's on their schedule? We're asking about sequencing here, which I do want to follow up on, but where are they in any sort of deliberation?
They have told us that they're deliberating it seriously, and we have asked them to deliberate it expeditiously, because we do believe that it would be a helpful signal to not just us, but also to the Nuclear Suppliers Group and to other concerned states about nonproliferation were they to join the PSI. So we've asked them to look at it expeditiously. They've promised that they will.
Do you think they would get it done in the next month or so, 2 months?
We can work with them on that. I think it would really help, particularly here, but also with other members of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and so we're making that case to them.
But when I was over there meeting with Prime Minister Singh, naturally this issue came up, and I brought up the Proliferation Security Initiative, and I think that would be helpful as we do our due diligence here, that you see that sort of action on the part of India's government in this respect. On this, finalizing this U.S.-India nuclear cooperation agreement and the changes here, trying to get the sequencing, we had a previous, it was a classified hearing, and I actually asked the same questions similar to Senator Sarbanes. The sequencing, as I understood it, that they have to enter into an agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and with this protocol for safeguards for India. You are suggesting that we have action here in the U.S. Senate before that agreement is reached. Is that correct?
That is correct, because we think that the negotiation of the IAEA safeguards, although it will have begun before this the bill is passed here, or before the bill is considered here, it would have begun between India and the IAEA. Again, they already do have a safeguards agreement on 4 of their reactors, and so there's some indication as to what one might look like. But yes, we believe the negotiation might take some longer time, and so we would like to pass the legislation and make the entry into force of the legislation contingent on the negotiation of the completion of the safeguards agreement.
All right, you mentioned there's 4 of them. Would that be a template that senators could look at as the sort of protocol safeguards?
Well, certainly, although, of course,
balance?
this is much broader. They're now, instead of just, I think 81% of their reactors are now outside, they're now going to put 2/3 inside. And so we're talking about something much broader. We're talking about also safeguards on storage facilities for nuclear fuel. So this is a lot that they're taking on, and we believe that getting the legislation passed and then monitoring and watching the IAEA negotiations will be very important. Let me just make one further point on that. We rely on the IAEA to determine safeguards around the world. We don't sit in the State Department or in the Defense Department or in the Energy Department making safeguards agreements with countries. That's why we have an International Atomic Energy Agency. And so, of course, we rely on their judgment as to what constitutes a proper set of safeguards. We play a role. We have a lot of personnel who are seconded to the IAEA, but there is nothing unusual about having the IAEA be the negotiator and, in effect, in a sense, the validator of the reliability and significance of a suitability of safeguards.
Right. Then after, assuming the sequencing goes and this action is taken by the U.S. Senate, not disapproving, it's a kind of double negative approach, IAEA approves. Then, and it's contingent on them settling an agreement, and one thing with India, they do respect the rule of law. That's part of their tradition, which is another similarity with our country. Ultimately, though, after all our action, would not the nuclear suppliers group, there's about 45 countries, then want to act? Would they not have to then act as well?
Yes, this would then have to be submitted to the nuclear suppliers group, which works by consensus. So yes, it would have to be submitted to them. We have several steps ahead of us.
Thank you. My time's up. Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Allen. Senator Boxer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Secretary Rice. I share your view that a strong bilateral relationship with India is important. India is a thriving democracy with a growing economy, and developing closer ties between our nations is something I strongly support in most everything I do. But I do not share the view that closer U.S.-India ties will be a counterweight to China, which seems to be one of the unstated yet driving forces behind this deal. And I think this type of thinking is not only outdated and dangerous, but it really flies in the face of reality. Last April, India and China signed 12 separate agreements on trade, security, and transportation. India and Chinese leaders have declared 2006 the year of India-China friendship. And it doesn't appear to me that India has any interest in being a hedge against China, and I believe it's naive to think otherwise. I think it's old-fashioned. I think it's that Cold War thinking. So efforts to improve U.S.-India relations should be a standalone policy, not tied to a China card. And I don't fault the administration for seeking an agreement on nuclear cooperation with India, but I think that agreement should be a win for America and a win for non-proliferation. And I don't believe this agreement is. So I want to lay out my concerns, and I'll question you about just one of them. I do have 5 areas. First, it rewards a nation for not signing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Second, it will give India the capability to produce more nuclear weapons than it otherwise could. I have information to place in the record from experts that claim it could be that the ability of India to produce nuclear weapons could go up from 6 a year to 50. Third, it requires a change in current law, and I think Senator Sarbanes was brilliant at making this point, that the checks and balances of the Congress will be so weakened that suddenly the IAEA, becomes more important to this administration than the Congress, which is putting us in a very strange position indeed. And fifth, I believe the United States gave away more than it received in this deal. So I'm going to expand briefly on these points. First, the deal rewards India for not signing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1970. As we all know, the NPT is the keystone of international non-proliferation efforts. And thanks to the NPT, more than 180 nations have not developed nuclear weapons. One of the great incentives of the NTP is that non-nuclear weapons nations are given access to civil nuclear assistance. By allowing India to receive civil nuclear assistance while it continues production of weapons, India is being rewarded. Second, this deal will give India the capability to expand its arsenal of weapons, as I mentioned before. While U.S. nuclear assistance will only be used for civilian purposes, uranium fuel imports from the U.S. will allow India to dedicate more of its scarce uranium ore for military use. And this isn't just me saying it. Let's go to an expert in India, a strategist who wrote in December, "The country is short of uranium. It was necessary to, quote, get imported uranium for India's power reactors so as to conserve all our indigenous uranium for weapons production purposes." I will spell the name of the gentleman who said that, Subrahmanyam. Experts believe this deal could allow, again, India to vastly increase its production of nuclear weapons from 6 to 50 a year. And this could touch off an unintended arms race in the region. Third, the draft legislation proposed by the administration requests that Congress exempt the U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Agreement from several key sections of the Atomic Energy Act, including one that prohibits the export of nuclear material or technology to any non-nuclear weapon state which has detonated a nuclear device. India needs an exemption because in 1974 it detonated a nuclear device, and it did so by improperly using U.S. and Canadian civil nuclear technology. In addition, there's a troubling report that the Institute for Science and International Security has uncovered, quote, a well-developed, active, and secret Indian program to outfit its uranium enrichment program and circumvent other countries' export control efforts, unquote. Fourth, the timing of this deal negatively impacts our policy in Iran, and this is what I really going to ask you about. Now, I understand that there is no comparison between India and Iran, but we still have to be consistent in terms of our policy. Either we want to limit the spread of nuclear weapons or we don't. There's growing evidence that the timing of the U.S.-India agreement is complicating our efforts to pressure Iran. Just last Wednesday, Germany's foreign minister said the timing of the U.S.-Indian nuclear agreement was, quote, certainly not helpful to attempts to ensure that Iran does not develop a nuclear bomb. As the Los Angeles Times editorialized last month, quote, the message to Iran and other nuclear wannabes couldn't be clearer or more destructive. These regimes and others will rightly conclude that the U.S. is interested in stopping the spread of nuclear know-how only to regimes it dislikes. This undermines U.S. moral leadership on the single most dangerous threat to humankind, the spread of nuclear weapons, unquote. And I want to take a minute to ask you about Iran, because we are all in agreement about the threat of Iran. I don't think there is a disagreement between anyone here. And you said in your recent editorial in favor of this deal, you said something that I agreed with about Iran, that they're a sponsor of terrorism, and they have violated their own commitments in defying the international community's efforts to contain its nuclear ambitions. I agree. So today we read or March 27th, excuse me, in the Defense News, headline, Indian Navy trains Iranian sailors. This is very disturbing. You go out of your way in your op-ed in favor of this deal to tell us all what we need to know about Iran, and then we have this circumstance. And my question is, this is a 3-year agreement that they are training Iranian sailors. Did you make a condition of this deal, their ending this support of Iran's military?
Right. Well, thank you, Senator. First, let me just address the first.
Could you just answer that
yes.
question first?
Well, first of all, the Indians say that they do have some low-level military-to-military contacts with Iran. I might just note that they're not the only country that has a strong relationship with, a long-term and strong relationship with Iran. So do many of our best allies. We are, in fact, the ones that do not have diplomatic relations with Iran. But I would just underscore what I said earlier to Senator Chafee. People are reviewing now and looking under a microscope at what they have been doing with Iran, because Iran's behavior over the last couple of years, which we've noted for a long time, has simply now given people a lot greater pause about their relations with Iran than they had in the past. I would note, for instance, that India was the only member of the non-aligned movement to vote for the referral of the Iranian nuclear program to the IAEA.
So, Secretary, my time is so limited, and
yes.
I don't want to interrupt you, but to get you to answer the question, did you make the ending of this program as part of the deal that you struck? Did you say, before we go forward with this, we want this ended? I mean, this is the Defense News of the United States of America.
Well, Senator, I'll tell
Indian
you that
Navy trains Iranian soldiers. The 2 of their ships were in the headquarters of Indian Navy's Southern Command. So you've got Iranian, you were saying on the one hand, we're going to allow fuel, nuclear fuel, to go from this country to their country, and they've got Iranian ships in port?
Senator, there
So
are
have you
Iranian,
made this
there
part
have
of the
been
deal?
and probably will be Iranian port calls in a number of countries in the
this
world.
isn't port calls. This is training of their military. Did you make this part of the deal, yes or no? Because the reason
Senator,
I'm asking is, I think some of us would like to make it a condition.
Senator, I'm trying to distinguish for you what is right in that article from what is wrong. There have been Iranian ship port calls in India. The assertion, we understand, that they train Iranian sailors is not right. That is,
So you say that the
well, not
defense
everything
news
in the
is
defense,
wrong
not everything
when
in
they
defense
say
news is
that
right.
2 Iranian warships were docked in a town, I don't want to pronounce it wrong, Kochl,
In Kochi?
Kochi, the headquarters of Indian Navy Southern Command, for a training program under a 3-year-old military cooperation agreement with Tehran. And all I'm asking you is, don't you think it's in the best interest of America, when we're going to do this extraordinary special deal, to make as a condition that they end that relationship?
Senator, I think that, again, let me distinguish. There are port calls that have taken place between Iran and India, yes. The Indians say that they do not train Iranian sailors and soldiers. And so there are military-to-military contacts. But again, let me put it in context. India is not the only country in the world that has relationships with Iran. Many of our
This is a
friends
country
do.
we're going to give nuclear technology to. That's what this is about. Lots of other countries do a lot of things. You're not sitting here suggesting that we give them the components to greatly increase their development
Senator, some of the
building nuclear
some of the
bombs.
countries that have relations with Iran, we already do U.S. Cooperation on civil nuclear
Well, you
power.
want a special deal for this country, and that's why it's important. And let just the record show that the Secretary, I'm assuming by her answer, this wasn't even an issue that was brought up, and it's of deep concern to me, and I'm sure to others in the Senate as well.
Well, Senator, let me correct the record. The United States has made very clear to India that we have concerns about their relationship with Iran. We've made clear to them we had concerns about the pipeline. We have made clear to them that we had concerns about their initial vote in the IAEA. So, of course, we have concerns
That's
about
not
the
my
relationship with
question,
Iran.
whether we have concerns.
But on this,
did we make it part of the condition of the deal? I have concerns when my kids do the wrong things, but I don't just tell them. I have some action that follows it up. So I just think your words are a bit hollow, specifically on this matter, and if you put it together with what Senator Sarbanes was able to ascertain, that you're really, in many ways, ducking around the Congress, I think that this deal has to have more checks and balances. That's it. And I know my time's expired. I appreciate your being lenient with me, Mr. Chairman.
may I just, for the record, again, Senator, state that the Defense News article, as it is written, is not, we believe, correct about the military-to-military relationship between Iran and India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Boxer. Senator Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this on now?
Yes.
Madam Secretary, thank you for coming and being well informed and answering our questions. As we look ahead, would you suggest that for our country, if we were thinking about the emergence of three great powers or influences in the world, that one might say one might be China, one might be India, and one might be political Islam?
I think that would be fair, Senator.
And if we were to look at those three, would you say that our prospects for a mutual relationship or partnership might be better with India than it might be with China or political Islam?
Well, I think our possibilities for a deep strategic relationship with India are particularly strong because of our shared values.
And I assume you wouldn't suggest that we should think of India, a country that will be the largest country in the world, as one of our children.
Absolutely not.
But as a partner that we would try to respect and understand their differences and where they are today and where we are today and where we both hope to go and see if we have mutual interests.
That's right.
I would like to focus more on nuclear power and clean air in the environment. Senator Allen talked about energy, and he and I have talked a good deal about. Senator Chafee and I have worked together on clean air in this country. And one of the things I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that we might want to explore, although it's a little bit out of our jurisdiction, is the impact of dirty air in India and China over the next 30 or 40 years on the air we breathe in the United States. Have you any, I mean, if I'm correct, only about 2% of the current power in India is nuclear. Is that about right?
That's correct, about 2%.
Of producing electricity.
Yes.
And in Japan it would be, well, in France it would be 78.
It would be 78% in France, and it's, I think, in Japan about 30% at this point in growth.
And in the United States, what we have learned in our hearings in energy is that while nuclear power only produces 20% of our electricity in the United States, and we use about 25% of all the energy in the world, it produces 70% of the carbon-free electricity, even though we haven't built a new nuclear power plant in 30 years. So increasingly, those who are concerned about global warming, about mercury, which is a new pollutant in the air, which we're just now beginning to regulate in the United States, about sulfur and nitrogen, are recognizing that to produce large amounts of clean carbon-free energy, there really is only one technology available today, and that's nuclear power. Right. Do you have any estimate of to what extent the pollutants that might come from dirty coal plants in India and China over the next 30, 40 years might end up in the air that Americans breathe?
I don't have an estimate of that, Senator, but obviously because the particulates that are being released by this dirty air are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions quite significantly. In fact, the emissions in India have increased about 3% a year. That's about twice the rate as in the United States. It's obviously contributing to the global problem that we are having with greenhouse gas emissions, and that for the United States, of course, is a very bad thing.
The senator from California mentioned the unclean air in Los Angeles. We have a similar problem in Tennessee around the Great Smoky Mountains. I wonder if you have any idea what percent of the dirty air in Los Angeles comes from India and China, or will over the next 30 or 40 years if they were to build coal plants instead of civilian nuclear reactors?
I don't have that estimate, Senator, but obviously contributing to the global problem with greenhouse gas emissions is a problem for us as well as it is for the Indians themselves.
I know I'm asking you questions that in some cases might be best to ask of the EPA and the Energy Department, but I think they're questions that are relevant to our weighing of these balances here. Such a question would be, Madam Secretary, and perhaps if you don't have the answer to this, someone within the administration could. Do you have any idea? We've become increasingly concerned about the amounts of mercury that are in the air in the United States. Do you have any idea how much of that mercury comes from other countries, in effect blown around the world and blown into the United States?
I don't, Senator, but I'll seek to get an answer for you.
As I look at India, and we talk about partnerships, is it not true that the United States Senate last year approved a $5 billion credit to help a British company, Westinghouse, owned by British, although Westinghouse is in Pittsburgh, to help build civilian nuclear power plants in China? What were the considerations there?
We do, and we did, in fact, do exactly that, because we believe that civil nuclear cooperation with China, a country with which we have cooperation, but of course have significant differences, including, I might say, on Iran, for instance, that the need for civil nuclear energy in China, given China's incredible appetite for growth and appetite for energy, was in the best interest of this country, not to mention in the commercial interest of those who could build the power plants. But yes, we absolutely did agree to that.
Is it true or not true that if the United States did not help India and China build nuclear reactors for civilian power, that Russia or France or some other country might do that, and in the process develop a massive new technology and business that could then be helpful in their own countries in having clean air?
Well, Russia already has some activity with China that they've grandfathered in under certain nuclear supplier group decisions. We do note that India's ability to acquire civil nuclear cooperation on a large scale is constrained by their absence of a relationship with the IAEA, which is why we think that getting them a relationship with the IAEA, getting them to agree to certain of the standards that all of us are adhering to, which they've said they are going to do, puts them in a position to get this clean source of energy for an economy that's growing at 8%. They're simply either going to have to do it through dirty coal, and as you and Senator Allen have been noting, their coal is particularly dirty, or through some other means. They're not going to stop growing to do it. They're going to do it one way or another, and we think the civil nuclear is by far the best path for them.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I think that what I will do is submit, if it's appropriate, to the Secretary a short series of questions that might require some answers from the Department of Energy or the Environmental Protection Agency, so that all of us can consider that, and they will be aimed at trying to understand what the consequences are if we don't help India and China, especially with civilian nuclear power. One of the leading environmental groups, the Natural Resources Defense Council, for example, is deeply concerned about the impact of dirty coal plants in India and China on the clean air in the United States and the rest of the world. That's just mercury, nitrogen, and sulfur. Add to that the global warming issues. So I think it's important for us to understand that and understand how that might not just affect the rest of the world, but to what extent that air blows into Los Angeles and into the Great Smoky Mountains and makes it impossible for us to deal with that. Thank you for the time.
Mr. Chairman, would you give me 10 seconds? I'd like to put in the record the CRS report on that issue and quote from one portion of it. However, such reductions, the totality of the reductions that would be accomplished by their full-blown nuclear program, civil, such reduction would constitute 2% of India's current CO2 emissions and 3.6% of India's energy-related emissions. It's real, but it's not very significant.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would submit that in place of 3,000 or 4,000 megawatts, well, or 30, the number of megawatts of nuclear power that India is thinking about building, 20, 30, 40,000 megawatts, would be 40, 50, or 60 conventional coal plants. That's a lot of sulfur, that's a lot of nitrogen, that's a lot of mercury, and that's a lot of carbon.
We would appreciate responses from the
I'd be
administration.
most happy to get responses for you.
Thank you.
To the senator's questions. Thank you, Senator Alexander. Senator Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What do I have to do with this thing?
I think it's on.
Thank you. Welcome, Madam
Thank you.
Secretary. Glad to see you. Madam Secretary, I was in India, as I think you know, and I thank Secretary Burns for briefing me before I went, and having good discussion about this issue in January, and I had the opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Singh and his National Security Advisor and the head of the Nuclear Power Commission, and our discussions focused not just on India's nuclear needs, energy needs as a whole, but also the way that this deal might be helpful to them in the long run. And needless to say, how this deal is important to the relationship between our two countries. I understand that. I think we all understand that. I heard a couple of colleagues talking about sort of rewarding India for not being a member of the NPT. I think we have to get over this notion that because of what's happened in past history, we can't deal with new realities that are on the table. If we always stay stuck in the same place, we never advance any ball. That is not to say that I think you have advanced the ball as far as you could have. I've said this with Secretary Burns. I'm inclined to support this agreement, and I said that in India I support it in principle because I think it's important to our countries. I think it's important to bring more of India's program under the IAEA safeguards. That is important. You have to ask yourself a simple question. If you want to sit there and say, gee, they stayed out of the NPT for all these years and therefore we're going to do something, we ought to get something for it. Now, some people think we ought to have gotten more for it. I happen to believe that. It's not where we are. It's not the deal I would have negotiated personally. I think there was a great opportunity here to deal with the overall proliferation issue of the region, including Pakistan and China. And proliferation is not just the movement of information and technology to other countries, it is also the building of weapons. And this clearly allows that continued building of weapons. But, you know, the perfect world is not sort of what's in our hand here, and I understand that. I do think you could have gotten closer to that, and I wish you had. But the fact is, it is better to build this relationship. It is better to move us forward in terms of the controls that will exist on the rest of what is defined as the civilian program. Now, India has the right to define what's going to be in the civilian and what's out. And some people have issues with that. I would hope that in the next days, and I've suggested this to Secretary Burns, and I think it would help you enormously with Congress. And I hope India is sort of listening to this and they're hearing some of the reluctance of some members. If we could try to find a way to advance the fissile missile material cutoff efforts, and if India itself could be helpful in these next days and perhaps helping us to rapidly define the IAEA safeguard standards, I am very uncomfortable, though I want to help, and I think I'm inclined to say we have to move forward here. I think you all have a responsibility to try to do the best we can in the next days to make that an even-handed process between the Congress and yourselves and India. I think Senator Sarbanes asked very important questions with respect to that. I heard them from back in my office. I am uncomfortable voting to change the overall structure without seeing those safeguards, knowing what they're going to be. And it seems to me reasonable, eminently reasonable, for you to press this process, given the concerns many members have, to help us to see those, to share that. And I think you'll find a Congress far more prepared to move forward more easily and with greater confidence if we were to do that. So I would ask you whether or not it's not possible really to try to guarantee to the Congress. I know in the briefing with Secretary Burns, I think his opinion was that that was important and might be done. And I wonder if you might sort of give us that confidence here today.
Well, we will certainly press it, Senator, both the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty and the IAEA safeguards. During the recent visit of Mr. Sarin, I told him in no uncertain terms that this was going to be an issue with Congress and that they ought to negotiate with the IAEA as quickly as possible. It'd be a problem to undertake a guarantee, but what I can guarantee you is that we will make every effort that we can to accelerate and push that process forward.
And what about the notion of advancing some of these other issues that were left off the table that might give Congress greater confidence with respect to the fissile material cutoff, or even the broader nonproliferation regime itself, which really needs an infusion of restructuring and greater urgency?
Well, on the FMCT, absolutely. We are trying to get the work done on that ourselves. We've told the Indians they need to be helpful in that. They've promised that they will, and we will press them very hard to help us on the MF, and they should know too that, by the way, it's one of the determinations the President will have to make, so we have that leverage. Secondly, on the broader proliferation regime, I agree with you, Senator. One of the reasons I think that Mohammed al-Baradei has been in favor of this is that there is much that India can do as a big state with nuclear technology to enhance our ability to, for instance, criminalize the behavior of those who trade in nuclear technologies. They have just passed a very strong act against this kind of activity in 2005, which would criminalize, it's much more like our law, criminalize in a much more comprehensive way any behavior that is abetting the trade in weapons of mass destruction technology. I think that's the kind of thing that they can do. Also by adhering to these various regimes, the Missile Technology Control Regime, the NSG guidelines, they can help us to expand the concept of what is the nuclear proliferation regime, because the NPT is an important part of it, but we clearly need more than the NPT. And I want to emphasize again that on the Proliferation Security Initiative, we will press very hard. I should just mention, Senator, you are well aware of these efforts, but because they started not with our administration, but go back to other administrations, we would like to see, obviously, in the regional sense, in the relationship between India and Pakistan and others, look at regional moratorium on fissile material production. We've made it very clear that we would encourage that we would encourage India and Pakistan to look at their nuclear relationship in the way that in some of the earlier days people were concerned about safety and security between the U.S. and Soviet arsenals. So there are a lot of things that we could do.
Did you explore, I mean, one of my concerns, I raised this issue with both the Prime Minister of Pakistan and President Musharraf, and there seemed to be a spark of interest. Maybe they were just, maybe they were being kind, but there seemed to be a genuine spark of interest in the notion of trying to arrive at some agreement regionally on the numbers of nuclear weapons. And it seems to me that that's a place where the United States could have offered real leadership, is trying to bring the parties together. It's hard to understand why they would need to continue to build levels beyond an adequate deterrent between each other and China. Did you explore that?
Well, what we couldn't achieve, and I think it was unlikely, was a constraint unilaterally by any one state. But the idea that has been pursued in some second track arrangements, some second-track discussions, of discussions between the parties about not just absolute levels, but also safety and security and confidence-building measures. I think it's something we're very interested in and we'd like to pursue. I think, Senator, we now have the kind of relationship with the two that might make it worthwhile. I can't say that it's going to have immediate payoff. These things are hard.
This, this really shouldn't be
very
that hard.
interested.
The United States and Russia, under the leadership of President Reagan, came out of Reykjavik, if I recall, and said we're going to go down to 0. Now, we backed off of that, and I think we're going to 2,500 from tens of thousands. If we could do it, the two great superpowers on the face of the planet, and everyone understands the absurdity of that kind of a conflict. So the adequacy of deterrence is defined. China has gotten along for 40 years quite effectively with, I think, in the double digits numbers. I'm not going to go into the classified areas here, but we all know that it has been a meager program compared to both the former Soviet Union and the United States. And they've been content to feel they have a sufficient deterrent. So it is absurd to believe that they have an interest in building up, and certainly India, if China is not, and is relatively even with respect to Pakistan, doesn't. The entire non-proliferation structure could have been advanced if the United States had put on the table that notion and pushed for it. Now, it's not within this agreement, and I understand that. It doesn't mean we shouldn't move forward here. But I would love to see the administration be more aggressive. I mean, even the last meetings that took place, we were not particularly engaged. We need to lead on this. And I might add, it is hard to lead when we have in our own budget money for a new nuclear weapon, a so-called bunker-busting nuclear weapon. I mean, as other countries make judgments about their own deterrence and their own threat response needs, they measure what other countries are doing. And if we indeed are the ones who are moving forward with a new concept, it sends shivers down their spine, and their defense establishment, just like ours, comes to them and says, hey, boys, you better start to respond. So I would hope you would really have a larger vision with respect to how we could ratchet this down. And within that context, I don't think you'd find many senators saying no to this.
Thank you, Senator. We obviously would like to see the tensions in the region continue to abate as they have been. I think we believe that we've built relationships with India and Pakistan that allow us to pursue some of the ideas that you're talking about, and they are certainly much like the ideas we'd like to pursue.
Can I just ask quickly, how will the United States react if China presses for a Pakistan exception similar to the India exception?
We've been very clear publicly, privately, with China, with Pakistan itself, that Pakistan is not an appropriate state for this kind of an exception. There's a different history.
What if they make that the price for approval of the India exception?
It can't be the price for approval of the India exception. It simply can't be.
Could that be a showstopper?
I don't believe so, Senator. Nothing that we've had discussions with suggests that, and Pakistan itself understands its own special history.
And in keeping with Senator Sarbanes's concern, you would not react badly if Congress didn't write itself out of this process?
Well, Senator, we believe very strongly that Congress is not writing itself out of this. We are only asking that by amendment of the law, we would follow the procedures that Congress would normally follow to approve nuclear commerce with any state.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Kerry. Now, this is a management problem here. I've been advised the Secretary needs to leave at 12:05. I would ask the Secretary's indulgence for a moment as I tried to parse now 10 minutes to each of 3 senators who have not been heard. And I hope the senators will respect the 10 minutes because we will be taking a little bit more of the Secretary's time, and she faces testimony before our House colleagues very shortly. But if we may proceed, Senator Feingold.
Chairman, I will try to keep it under 10 minutes, respect for my colleagues. But let me thank you for holding today's hearing with Secretary Rice on the proposed United States-India Nuclear Energy Agreement. This is obviously a very important subject and shown by the attendance here at the hearing. Madam Secretary, I appreciate your spending time with us today, and I just ask that my full statement be placed in the record.
Placed in the record in full.
I'll be blunt. I've been troubled by the way the administration has handled this issue from the start, not consulting with Congress prior to announcing a deal that requires changes to U.S. law, submitting legislation that asks Congress to remove itself from any oversight, and pushing Congress to approve this legislation without the benefit of seeing the agreement. The process problems are not, however, my first concern. After reviewing what is known about the deal, which admittedly is not much at this time, I would be sort of hard-pressed to explain to my constituents why this agreement is so vital to our national interests. In addition to providing us with a better rationale for the agreement, I urge the administration to provide us with a more detailed analysis of the potential negative impact this agreement could have on the non-proliferation coalitions and policies we've painstakingly put together over the last 30 years. The proliferation of nuclear technology, know-how, and material may be the top national security threat we face, and I fear that this deal could end up making our world less safe rather than more safe. But I am glad you're here, and I obviously understand this is a very complex issue. I just want to ask a few more questions. Undersecretary Burns has publicly noted that all future civilian reactors built in India will be subject to safeguards, thus arguing that an increasing percentage of India's nuclear program will be under international controls. But doesn't India get to decide whether a given reactor is classified as civilian or military? So what's to prevent India from designating all future reactors as military in order to avoid international safeguards?
It is true that India makes that determination, as do sovereign states. We make that determination, for instance. But the Indians, we believe the incentives, the powerful incentives for them are on the civilian side, not on the strategic nuclear side. They have 50,000 tons of uranium reserves, more than enough if they wished to use the small percentage of that that would be required for a military program. It's on the civilian side that you need a lot of nuclear material to fuel a civilian program over a long period of time. So we simply think the incentives are in the other direction, and that the Indians are trying to get civil nuclear energy, and that this is something that, of course, people will be able to watch, but it's I think someone said, maybe it was Senator Biden, who said that the Indians are also taking on a set of obligations here with the world, and people will be watching.
But you concede that this is entirely within their discretion, this
It
designation?
is indeed within their discretion.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. You said that the safeguards will be permanent, but India emphasized that these, quote, permanent safeguards would be predicated on an uninterrupted supply of fuel for civilian reactors. Now, doesn't that tie our hands down the road if in the future India tests or uses nuclear weapons or proliferates nuclear technology? Will the United States continue to supply fuel for India's nuclear reactors?
We've been very clear with the Indians that the permanence of the safeguard is permanence of the safeguards without condition. In fact, we reserve the right, should India test, as it has agreed not to do, or should India in any way violate the IAEA safeguards agreements to which it would be adhering, that the deal, from our point of view, would at that point be off.
As you noted, with the world's second largest population and fast growing economy, we all have to be concerned about India's energy consumption and production of greenhouse gases. You've said that this deal will reduce India's reliance on coal and oil, but I would argue that there are more effective means of doing so than selling a few nuclear reactors. India's Bureau of Energy Efficiency estimates that improving energy efficiency could save 80 to 20 gigawatts per year, which is more than all the future output from nuclear reactors now being planned. If improving India's energy mix is a primary motivation of this deal, have you considered other non-nuclear approaches, like a cooperation agreement that would help India improve its energy efficiency?
We intend to do all of that. In fact, on a multilateral basis through the Asia-Pacific Partnership, which is India, South Korea, the United States, Australia, we are engaged also in questions about energy efficiency, about other kinds of energy technology, trying to use other sources of renewables. So that piece we are doing, but it doesn't obviate India's growing need for nuclear energy as a part of the mix.
Finally, according to an article by Dr. Leonard Weiss for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, only 1% of India's electrical capacity is fueled by oil. So replacing this tiny amount with nuclear power won't even register on the world oil market. Do you maintain that this deal will have a major impact on India's oil consumption and the price that U.S. consumers will pay for oil?
Well, India does need to change its mix. The point, of course, they use principally coal, which is very, very bad for the environment given the nature of their coal. But because they're trying to diversify away from coal, they're looking at other sources. And right now, while the percentage from oil is somewhere in the 30 to, some people say as much as 50%, but let's say it's at the 35%. As they diversify, you would like that diversification from coal not to go to oil, which is one way that it could go, but rather from that diversification from coal to go to multiple other sources that are clean and that do not require further hydrocarbons and that do not require their dependence on what we consider to be, and we believe we are convincing them, are unreliable suppliers.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. In order to give my colleagues a chance, Mr. Chairman, I'll defer at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Feingold, for your thoughtfulness. I appreciate that. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to be brief because I want my colleague to have plenty of time also. And Madam Secretary, I might say that you have a very fine representative in Secretary Burns, who I've talked to extensively about this issue. Now, I'm concerned, earlier it came up, I think, with Senator Boxer, about this article that appeared in the Post today about the port of call of an Iranian warship. And so in following up the earlier discussion, is the Indian military cooperating in any way with the Iranian military?
The Indians have told us that they have some, as they characterize them, low-level military-to-military contacts. But again, Senator, I would just note that there are a number of countries that have relations with Iran. And it's, of course, the sovereign right of a country to have relations with whomever they would like to have relations. I believe we're not going to do better in pulling India toward us by insisting that they cut off relations with other states. I don't think that's going to work very effectively. But the entire world is coming to think differently about its relationships with Iran. We see it in the exodus of banking and financial institutions from Iran. We see it in the vote that India took in the IAEA Board of Governors. This is a relationship that goes back a very, very long way. But as Iran changes its relationship with the rest of the international community, I think you're going to see more and more states reassessing their relationships with Iran.
Well, I certainly hope that that's the case, that the entire world is reassessing and will do something about it after they reassess, because at least from this senator's point of view, that the nuclearization of Iran would be one of the greatest destabilizing threats to the interest of the United States.
I could not agree more, Senator.
And I'm interested as to the implications of this agreement with India with regard to that. What do you think are the implications of this agreement on our diplomatic effort to convince Iran to give up its nuclear processing?
Senator, I just returned from a very long meeting with the other members of the P5 plus Germany, and I can tell you the India deal did not come up in this long, long meeting on Iran. Now, I know that there are those who say, well, you're treating India differently than you are proposing to treat Iran and North Korea. Yes, India is a democracy, a transparent society. Iran is the central banker of terrorism, a non-transparent society. North Korea even less transparent than Iran. North Korea and Iran have, of course, broken their, first of all, signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but then have not lived up to those obligations, flaunted those obligations. India is trying, having never signed the NPT, to move toward the taking on voluntarily of obligations that are similar to those of NPT states. And so the situations are just very different. And I think if we allow the Iranians and the North Koreans to say that we cannot have civil nuclear cooperation with a good actor like India because we have to deal with their bad behavior, then that would be a very bad thing for U.S. policy. And so I don't think it has an effect. I should just note, too, that, by the way, the civil nuclear, the possibility of civil nuclear power is something that the world is offering to Iran. But what has been said is you can't have civil nuclear cooperation that has enrichment and reprocessing on Iranian territory because of your very bad past history of the last 18 years in violating your IAEA agreements. So on the one hand, we have a democratic, transparent state that has not violated agreements that it signed on to. It didn't sign on to the NPT. And states that are wantonly violating those agreements, supporting terrorism, non-transparent, repressing their people. I just don't think there's any comparison, and I don't think we should allow one to be made.
Mr. Chairman, I want to give my colleague plenty of time to ask his questions. I will follow up with you in further discussion as to how we can bring China and Russia, for example, around to our point of view that it's in their interest to have a non-nuclear Iran. And what further that we can do in Europe to get those who are resistant there to achieving that goal. This ought to be an all-out effort.
Thank you, Senator. I look
Thank
forward
you,
to the
Mr.
conversation.
Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you very much to Senator Nelson for your thoughtfulness to the committee and to your colleague, and now the colleague that you have mentioned, Senator Obama.
Senator Nelson's a fine man.
I agree.
Madam Secretary, thanks. You know, I'm always batting cleanup, so I don't always know if I'm being redundant in some of my questioning. Forgive me if some of these questions were posed earlier and you already answered them. Just a brief statement at the opening. I personally think that the geopolitics of this agreement make a lot of sense, and I suspect that's shared by many at this table. I think that India is a critical long-term partner for the United States. As you've noted, they share our values. There are deep commercial and personal relationships between the two countries that I think need to continue to grow. India is only going to continue to be a larger player on the world stage, and they occupy an important piece of real estate in addition to having 1 billion or so people. So the geopolitics I don't think are an argument here. I also think that it's legitimate to say that India, the nature of the society and its democracy and its government are different from Iran. And we can make easy distinctions, I think, between India and other nations that might be pursuing nuclear arms. They've shown themselves to be responsible, so I think we can concede that as well. Having said that, all that, there are specifics to the agreement that I have concern about. So let me just be clear if I'm understanding this properly. You've got 22 nuclear plants. 14 now under the agreement would be subject to IAEA.
Oh, my. Oh, wait, good. It's still working. Okay. So I can turn that off right now. So while doing some electrical testing here, I realized that a couple of the battery backup units that I have dead batteries in them. It's something I haven't troubleshot yet. I knew I had one or two dead batteries, and I'm doing some electrical work in the house, so this is good. Anyways, the podcast is still not podcast. The stream is still going. I'll restart this in a bit. I have the power just connected to a few things in the house right now, and I will restart it. And yeah, this is Senator Barack Obama speaking. What you've been watching in the last, I'll recap. What you've been watching here is a 2.5 hour. The entire session may have been longer, but this is what's available on C-SPAN. Session on the India nuclear deal, and it's a United States Senate hearing. The star of the show is Condoleezza Rice, as I mentioned before. She is an associate of Dr. Joshua Lederberg. Of course, Lederberg passes in 2008, I think, 7 or 8. So his name is not mentioned here. Barack Obama speaking is curious. Let's say it's curious here. It's a curious context. He is, I believe, one of the youngest senators of all time. He's the ultimate junior senator at this time, and it's what's most don't know is I don't know a ton about Barack Obama's upbringing, his parents, his ancestry, but I did make note that one of his, at the very least, a someone who helped support his campaign and provided some assistance was an equally, maybe a little bit older at the time, but equally young man named Raja Krishnamurthy in Illinois, who is now a representative, and a man who's also on the path to becoming a senator for the state of Illinois. And Raja Krishnamurthy is born in India. Now, while many people, such as I don't know many people promoted this, theories of Barack Obama and his getting his dad wrong, lying about his parents or where he was born, a birth certificate. I don't know. Okay, I don't know what's true. I don't know what isn't true. I haven't looked into it. All I know is these people say this, these people say that. Okay, whatever. Not trusting something is a very different statement than saying it's wrong, because I don't know what's right or wrong. But what I do know is the role of Raja Krishnamurthy is very interesting because, and then when you look at Harry Reid, if you look at the whole package of people that have been supporting Barack Obama, you find many people with very, very strong ties to India. Now, also, India itself in this India nuclear deal is always mentioned in the same conversation as the Iranian nuclear deal. So while everyone has said, well, everyone, let's just be too hyperbole. Let's get a little hyperbole taken out there. But while many have said Clinton, Obama, Iranian nuclear deal bad, what about the Indian nuclear deal? I know it doesn't sound as fascinating, but I believe that they are deeply connected. It's many of the same people negotiated them, and they're usually negotiated at the same time. Anyways, Condoleezza Rice, Senator Richard Lugar speaking there. He's now deceased. There's a lot of moving parts here, and it's great the U.S. to be building these relationships with as many countries as possible. I mean, we all want, but there's something else going on here, okay? And here we are almost 20 years later. It's almost 20. Basically, has been 20 years since this particular event here. We're in April 2026 right now. And where are we? Raja Krishnamurthy, a man born in India, was heading a subcommittee in the United States Congress regarding oversight of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, it has to be the most obscene conflict of interest in all of U.S. history. I don't know how is that even allowed? But no one will even mention it today. Not to mention, we also have an opioid epidemic right now with many opioid byproducts coming out of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India in the United States. And we have someone born in India, Jayanta Bhattacharya, who doesn't even mention that the United States has had an opioid epidemic that's killed several 100,000 young people. And in totality, over 1 million in its phase. And the United States has been having several years of approximately 100,000 fatal drug overdoses a year, when back in the 1990s it was around 18,000 to 20,000 a year. So these are discussions, very uncomfortable discussions that need to be had. Anyways, for whatever it's worth, a few more minutes of this needs to be captured. I need to take care of this electrical issue, though. Thank you for watching. Thank you. Take care. God bless. And remember, Daniel Pearl, the famous journalist who was assassinated, was with the Wall Street Journal, and his stories before 9/11, while he was in India, were HIV vaccines and human embryonic stem cells. In particular, one of the companies he followed was Reliance Health, which is a Robert Malone connection. And then right after 9/11, he goes to Pakistan, shoe bomber, interview, something like that, and then he dies. So just throwing that one out there. Thank you. Take care. We'll archive a little bit more starting in another half an hour, hour or two, or whatever. All right. Thank you. God bless.